Joins us right now to talk some baseball. We're close to the start of the college baseball season. We're close to the start of the high school baseball season. Not really sure when Major League Baseball is going to begin, as they are currently in a lockout. But, Jay, it's good and cold outside, so that means baseball is almost here.
That's right. I told somebody that the other day when we were having the snow and everything else. I said, well, baseball's right around the corner, and usually when that's happening.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. Although we are all looking forward to 70 and sunny for opening day. No question.
Yeah, I'm crossing my fingers, but you never know about that.
Yeah. Let's talk about the news for Major League Baseball yesterday as it pertains to the Hall of Fame. You obviously have former teammates, guys that you're friends with, who have been inducted into the Hall of Fame. Some guys who maybe you think should be in the Hall of Fame but are not. We get the news yesterday that the only member of this year's class is Big Papi, David Ortiz. And this ended the run where the Baseball Writers Association could vote in Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and Curt Schilling. As a former player that played in what so many people refer to as the steroid era, give me some thoughts on this. When you look at this thing overall, where are you, man?
Well, I mean, honestly, I got kind of mixed feelings on it. I tell people all the time, Barry Bonds is probably the greatest player greatest hitter I've ever faced. I mean, he could flat out hit, whether it was steroid induced or the guy still could hit. I mean, he was that type of guy. Looking back on it, sometimes you kind of get bitter that you felt like obviously there was a big time unfair advantage with a lot of guys, not just hitters, but pitchers also. And when you had to compete against that, it does kind of make you bitter sometimes. But as far as the voting and the way they're handling it now, to me, it's no longer a Hall of Fame. It's a who was nice to reporters. I mean, look, Barry and Roger and those guys were, you know what? I mean, they were ornery. They wasn't the most pleasant guys to be around, especially for reporters. And so that's what you're seeing now. I mean, and look, David Ortiz is deserving. It's happy for him. He was a fun-loving, great, just big old teddy bear. Everybody loved him. But what do so because he was nice to reporters now, he's in the Hall of Fame, and the other guys wasn't, because he did the same thing those guys did. I mean, so you can't. I mean, what are you trying to do now? I think it's gotten now the Hall of Fame's basically just become a sham, for lack of a better word.
Should we be looking at the Hall of Fame not as this like moral high ground for who should and shouldn't be in, and maybe looking at it more? I think it was Jeff Passan yesterday at ESPN that said, the stated mission of the Hall of Fame is to preserve the history of Major League Baseball. And this is part of the history of Major League Baseball.
Yeah. Yep. You're right. In my opinion, I mean, when it first came out, years ago, I think I've softened on it more. I think those guys should get in. I really do, because I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of other guys in it that just didn't get called. There's some really bad guys in the Hall of Fame that did things a lot worse than what these guys have done. Is it fair? No. I get it. You're talking about the integrity of the game. That's why Pete Rose isn't in. But at this point, if you're going to let Ortiz in, I think it's comical now that these other guys aren't in.
So am I hearing you say that you do think Barry Bonds should be in, and you do think Roger Clemens should be in?
Yeah, if you're going to let Ortiz in, I think you got to let those guys in, because what's the difference in what Ortiz has done and what Barry did or what Roger did? I mean, so Raphael. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, these guys that are, so where do you draw the line? I mean, if you're going to keep everybody with links to PEDs out of the Hall of Fame, I mean, you can't do that anymore now.
Yeah. What about Schilling? You think his issue is more kind of the person he's been and the outspoken guy that he's been and his political leanings?
He's a conservative guy, and most 99.9% of all the media are liberal, left-leaning guys, and they're not going to vote Curt Schilling in. Curt Schilling's a Hall of Famer, but he's being kept out because of his beliefs on his stance on the country and politics, and that 100%, no question.
Jay, what would it look like? How would it be different if instead of allowing the baseball writers to be the group that determines who gets in and who doesn't get in, if it was players who had to vote?
It would look a lot. I mean, it'd look a lot more legitimate. I mean, because it would be more of the guys that know who. To me, it ought to be. I know they have a veterans deal that votes on it, but there ought to be guys getting votes from those. Like there ought to be players from those generations ought to be voting on those Hall of Famers. I mean, because now you're getting, you've got the old Peter Gammons group of guys, and now you're getting another young wave, and it's to me, it's like I said, it's going to be comical. I mean, it really has. I mean, there's some guys in the Hall of Fame that are so deserving or a heck of a lot better than I ever thought of it being. But to keep these now, if you're going to let Ortiz in, which, like I said, I think he's very deserving. Great dude, great teammate. Never had a chance to play with him, but heard nothing but good things about him. But if you're going to let him in, you got to let the rest of him in. I mean, you can't. The only reason he got in and these other guys haven't got in is because he was so much more enjoyable to be around. He kind of smoothed with the reporters and all this, and they loved him. And Roger wasn't like that. Barry wasn't like that. Schilling wasn't like that. And that's okay. I mean, so you're going to keep them out because you're saying steroids? No, you're keeping them out because you didn't like them personally. And that's where we're at. It's a popularity contest. It's got nothing to do at this point with baseball. Nothing.
You can't have a conversation. You can't have a conversation, Jay, about the Hall of Fame and guys who deserve to be in based on what they did on the field without Pete Rose's name coming up. You even mentioned it a second ago.
Yep.
Is it a different conversation when it pertains to Pete Rose, or do you kind of look at this and go, based on what he did on the field, he ought to be there too?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, to me, honestly, that's where, to me, it gets in a gray line. I had more of a problem, honestly, with Pete Rose betting on the outcome of baseball games, and I deal with these guys using PEDs, and people say, well, how can you say that? I mean, either way, they're both affecting the outcome. But I felt like at least the guys, and I'm sure Pete always bet his team to win, or I don't know. But, that to me, I have more of a problem with than I have with these guys doing steroids. I really did. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm a little more on the fence about Pete than I am about these guys, just because it's, I think at the end of the day, I think you got to let him in. I think you got to let these guys in. I feel like now you're past that point. These guys need to be put in, and you can't now make it just a popularity contest of who you like as a reporter and who you didn't like.
Do you think the Veterans Committee will vote these three in particular that we're talking about in?
I think they will. I really do. I think now that Ortiz is in, and look, this isn't I really do. I mean, I think David Ortiz is very deserving. And I think, honestly, him getting in will probably help these other guys because, he's got ties to PEDs also. And, I mean, with him getting in, it's probably going to kind of open the door for Barry and Roger and these guys. Now,
and maybe paves the road for Palmeiro also, right?
It might, yeah. And same thing with Raphael. I mean, I think you're going to see the door starting to creak open a little bit. But honestly, I don't know if that helps Pete Rose long term. I really don't, because you're talking about a different circumstance.
Yeah. Hey, last thing for you, only about a minute left. When you were playing, how commonly known was it in clubhouses, in locker rooms, that guys were using performance-enhancing drugs?
Well, it was a Wild West. I mean, it was. This is the way I always describe it, and I'll describe it quickly. If you had 25 guys on the roster, you had probably 5 guys that were using it all the time consistently. You probably had 5 guys that try it off and on during the season. And then you have probably 2 or 3 or 5 that have tried it at some point in their career. And you only had 10 guys like me that never did it. I mean, and, that's honestly the way it was. I mean, that's just the world we lived in. Nobody tested for it. Nobody asked questions. And, I mean, you're talking about lots of money and everything else, and that's what guys did back then.
Did you ever consider using, Jay?
Absolutely. I mean, I'd be lying to tell you I didn't. I mean, when you see the guys you're playing against and your competition, the people that are trying to take your job doing it, and you're like, man, all of a sudden they rededicate themselves in the off season, and their velocity goes up 6 miles per hour, and they're trying to take your job. You're crazy if you don't consider it. But I was at the point in my career where I was like, you know what, I want my life after baseball is more important to me than this, and I never did.
You're the best, Jay. Really appreciate your time, your candor, and your insight. We'll talk.